All right, today we're going to go over the top 10 Pokemon in Galar decks. Um, it's a video I've been wanting to get to. This is my opinion on who the top 10 are. So let's get right into it. All right, we're going to start with the honorable mentions. We get Kira and Zapdos. I don't really mind which order you have these two in. So let's start with Kira. Well, so Kyurem does have high bulk. It has pressure, roost. It can eat things. It can stat check things, right? So, you know, maybe Cinderace is sitting in front of you. Oh no, it could click high jump kick, it could click low kick, it could click a strong pyro ball. You might not worry about that depending on your set. You might be able to eat that pretty comfortably. If your policy or dragon dance or something like that, um, you can make things dangerous for them. You could even roost off like strong hits. There's not a lot of things that actually beat Kyurem like that well. Scissors like a decent check. It has just strong stabs. I didn't write that. Um, Ice Beam is just strong. It's coming with a strong special attack. Um, and it just has stats and has a pretty okay speed. Um, so that makes it kind of difficult to handle. And when it's clicking Ice Beam over and over, it ends up getting a lot of freezes in a lot of games. So that's an X factor because freeze is completely game changing. Um, so that makes Kirim really strong, but Kirim has a lot of things that hold it back. Um, if you click wrong with Kirim, sometimes you can be put completely out of position. And like let's say you click Ice Beam into maybe a Melmetal with lefties, or you click it into an Aegislash. Those are dangerous Pokemon that can make your position get a lot worse. Um, So a lot of steel types, in Gen 7, they might perform more of a utility role. In Gen 8, they're not like that. You'll almost never see a steel type clicking Stealth Rocks because most of them that are actually good don't learn Stealth Rocks. What they're going to be doing is trying to win the game. And so when Kyurem's clicking, ice moves into some of these steel types, it can be dangerous. Kyurem doesn't fill roles. It doesn't check things defensively. It's not made to beat top tiers. It's not great at concealing information. If you have rocks up, you will see if it's boots or not. If you see it's boots, it changes the threat level. A lot of rock weak Pokemon, if they have to reveal boots, that just hurts their overall threat level. Um, it can get kind of trolled if the opponent predicts a set into like somewhat bad situations. People can start bringing protect. It can get kind of ugly in that way. And obviously, with rocks up, longevity can become a problem with a lot of the sets because a lot of times you don't want to run boots. Speedcheer's not perfect; it's good, not perfect, and then it can't set up special attack. So some of these steals, if you want to run Dragon Dance, like Dragon Dance Earth Power is not going to be like super great against like a Melmetal, right? And you might need boosting on to break fat, and you could try to do multiple things at once, but you're not that good at it. So this is actually like a pretty debilitating list of flaws. Um, and that is why like these strengths we see here, these are like really good traits. But this list of flaws um is real. And is something to consider. And there are a few things that do like kind of check it, like scissor, but I didn't mention that. I want to make it fit on the screen. Um, there's a few things I had to change font size for, but most things, if the thing's not on the screen, I can bring it up on my own. Well, let's talk about Zapdos. So Zapdos can stall at certain attacks. So let's say Stone Edge, right? It only has 8 PP. You can run pressure. You can just start eating it, especially with Roost. Um, you can also Roost Static Fish for stuff. Get back to full. Good sustain, right? Static's just a really good ability to bother things like Heart as well. The support tools it has are really solid. Tailwind's like pretty bad in singles, but like there are situations for it. It's not the best on Zapdos. There's a better user of it, and we'll talk about that later. The typing of Zapdos is just super good and anti-meta, and like it just stops a lot of things, especially cart. That's the really like clear one. You know, like Zapdos is just really, really solid at checking certain things, and its typing is the real reason why, and being able to punish U-turn with static, and sometimes it can run helmet because it can run a lot of items. People want to say Boots is super good on Zapdos. It is, but Zapdos is really good with a lot of items. You can run Magnet, you can run Boots, you can run Helmet, you can run Specs, you can run Lefties. Zapdos can do a lot of that. It's flexible in that regard. It's great at filling rolls. It doesn't cover your speed, right? But it fills a lot of rolls. It's able to be an offensive threat with Hurricane and Thunderbolt and Heat Wave, and has U turn, so it always can guarantee progress in exchanges. And it's kind of tricky to pressure it because it doesn't have a ton of weaknesses, and you don't want to hit it with these physical contact moves. So that makes like Zapdos really kind of awkward to try to outplay. And this sounds like a lot of strengths, right? Let's talk about some of these weaknesses. Having an offensive Zapdos, and this isn't even all the weaknesses. It can really infringe on its goals defensively because it just doesn't have that much defensive bulk. So you're going to see that this offensive investment really changes roles a lot. So you often can't really remove it, or bad things will happen. So Japs's investment is really sometimes spread a little thin. The other thing is a knockoff is common on a lot of these physical contact mons. So maybe they run pads, maybe they have to do something like that. But you're going to lose your boots, and then you're going to be weak to stealth rocks. It's not great at checking like a +2. Like if something like sets up, right? A Solomon sets up a DD. Zapdos, while it has a good defensive profile, it can get kind of blasted through to some extent. It's not the best at responding to that type of stuff. Not much is, but it's just something to think about. Meteor Beam's pretty common. There's a lot of teams now. There's some teams that we've seen that have had Meteor Beam spam, and Zapdos just kind of puts itself at risk to those types of, like, sometimes you want to lead this and it just gets nuked on the first turn. And that can totally happen. It doesn't have great setup options. It can't really break fat that easily. It's vulnerable to being toxic and then just stalled out by kind of fatter stuff. It doesn't quickly break electrics. And something I didn't write here, but something that's very important, is it relies a lot offensively on clicking Hurricane, which is a very unreliable move. So Zapdos has a lot of flaws. They don't even fit on screen, right? So it has a lot of perks. We saw this earlier. These are some really good traits. But these are a lot of weaknesses and a lot of things that hold Zapdos back from being able to do all the jobs it wants to do at the same time, first of all, and well. And because of that, I do think it is a fantastic Pokemon. I don't think that it is top 10. I think there are better Pokemon. And from now, I'm not going to go from 10 to 1. I'm actually going to go from 1 to 10 because I think that will be more suspenseful and more interesting. Now, it may seem a little bit weird because I may have a controversial first pick, but then you may be wondering down the line, where do I put some things that you believe should be listed, right? So that's why I choose to do this. Now, I think Zapdos and Kyurem, if you want to say Zapdos is better than Kyurem, I understand that. I just think that, Kyurem's strengths and weaknesses have a little bit more in Kyurem's favor. But I do find it to be close. Nevertheless, who I believe the best Pokemon in Sword and Shield to be, Landorus. And you can notice I changed the font size. Landorus has no bad matchups. None. It just doesn't have bad matchups. These 3 moves that it has basically cover everything. It always can make progress with these 3 moves. Almost always. And then if it can't, it still has other stuff. It has Toxic and Knockoff. It has rocks, first of all, right? It covers everything you want the ground to do. Explosion, you can trade. It's one of the best Scarfers out there. Lando T is like super good Scarfer, and you can be even run it defensive and Scarf and still be super functional. Almost nothing walls it. Gravity, Smackdown, all that stuff too. It covers the most roles of any mon in the metagame. It just checks so much. And of course, not long term, but Sword and Shield is a metagame where if you have an advantage, it will snowball out of control extremely quickly. And because of that, having a short term answer to these things can be way more critical than having longevity. It often has a lot of free move slots. Since it has that trio of progress, sometimes, oh, I'm not going to bring Stealth Rex. I need some certain utility. Maybe I need Defog in this game. You're going to have access to do that. It's going to give you these opportunities because of how flexible it is in how it can choose its slots. Um, it covers a lot of pivots really well, and it can conceal information in such a way that it can't really be punished, and it can go into more of these ambiguous exchanges. So like even if you have rocks up, right, and some Coco clicks U-turn on you, let's say it's Coco Kiram, and Kiram comes in, right? If you have a Scarf Lando and you see that this Kiram has not taken rocks, you get to U-turn on it, and in the next time this happens, Stone Edge probably kills. Um, if you see that it has taken rocks, then you scout. And if it is Scarf, then it is easier to handle. And if it is not Scarf, then guess what? It's probably you're just back in the same exact situation. So when it is really difficult to actually make progress against with U-turners, a lot of the time there are exceptions. Um, but yeah, it has a lot of setup options. Rock polish. It has sword stance. It has calm mind, and honestly, these special sets are still good because it allows it to comfortably break past things like Cortana, and even like Buzzhole, which are quite easy to break past for Orlando T. It's able to feel like it still has power with this core trio of moves, even in a defensive role. It almost doesn't matter how you invest it, because it will always feel good. The investment barely feels like it. You never get super punished from investing Lando in the way that you want to. You can run almost any item on it, and people have to actually respect it. Because Lando T doesn't reveal its item in most cases. It's because it can run a lot of different items. Um, it's good at every single phase of the game. It's good as a lead. It's good in the mid game at holding your team together. It's good in the early game at holding your team together. It's strong in the end game. It is literally always good. This Pokemon is really close to being like perfect, if we're being quite clear. Um, and you could say, oh, it doesn't have some of the strengths that the others have, right? You could say that, and I totally agree with that. But once we get to this weaknesses section, I just want you to understand I just don't have very much listed. Um, because I can't really talk bad about its defensive capabilities, and I can't talk about its offensive abilities and its abilities to put those together. They're just too good. Um, Now, what I can talk about, we'll go to this. It can be improved by having 200 speed. Now, this is kind of me being, um, I'm joking a little bit, right? But these teams still are going to need some speed options at the end of the day, and Lenoty doesn't provide that role. Um, it just doesn't need to. It just doesn't. You can get it elsewhere. Um, the other thing is like Keldeo and Shifu Rapid, they do put it out of position. Like again, when we said the scarf thing with Kira, that just doesn't apply with those two. Those two, yeah, that U-turn damage won't matter. They're just annoying. Okay, and those two are getting more common. So yeah, those are like real kind of like annoyances, sort of. Um, but yeah, I still think Lanacy is the best because I think every Pokemon has like some weaknesses, right? Um. So anyway, like, well, let's actually go back to the strengths page. Let's talk about some details, right? Minxiao, Coco, Zeraora, Cinderace. It checks Cinderace almost as well as Garchomp. Um, assuming Lando T's defensive and Garchom's not, which is more realistic that Lando T can do that. It can check a lot of special attackers if you really put your mind to it. Um, it could probably somewhat check a cart if you run Fizz Def. Um, it really can check almost the entire metagame. There just isn't a lot that truly makes progress on it either. To me, this is like not clearly the best Pokemon, but I believe it is the best Pokemon. Number two, Tornti. And this one, while it's not a temporary check to basically the whole metagame almost, it's a soft check to a huge portion of it, huge portion. And it's very sustainable. It can be offensively dangerous. It covers a great speed tier and it has great progress clicks. And you know, the words written on the page don't put into perspective like how meaningful this really is. When I say soft checks, you can come in on like most of the moves something could click, right? Force it out and just lose nothing from exchanges. Like that's incredible. And it also like the offensive prowess is really good and it covers a critical role. And it does cover some roles, right? Like mostly soft, but that's honestly fine. Um, so you know, it also has like some utility. Like it can be a defogger too. This is just generally very good. It has taunt as well, so it can stop recovery. It can beat down fat. It's good against offense to some extent. Um, so yeah, I mean, not all types of offense, and then we're gonna get into the problems with Torn. It has occasional bad matchups. It does. So there's certain offenses where it just either doesn't like break that quickly and just doesn't have a good defensive matchup, or something in that regard. There's a couple matchups like that. They're not common, but they exist. And offensively, it's inconsistent just because its stab is Hurricane, and Hurricane again has 70% accuracy. So not perfect in that regard. Still, you know, not a ton of flaws. And a lot of upside here. Um, so I do think it's the second best. Um, so I hope that's not too controversial, and I don't think my third pick will be too controversial. Um, maybe it'll be a little bit. My first pick maybe was I don't know if that's the most popular. I think a lot of people would have Torrent number one right now. Um, well, let's go to number three. It probably won't seem too out of place. I got Tapu Koko again. Zero bad matchups from Tapu Koko. I also want to mention Torn's really easy to build around. This is also really easy to build around. You have free progress. You have easy ways to get around fat. It's super easy to use. Just easy, it's a great pivot. It covers speed. That's covered at 130. It has an okay defensive profile. It has recovery. It can break a little bit. It's not the best breaker, but it can try to do it. It has it's just super safe clicks, and then it has utility to support an offensive team. And that's a lot. So basically, it's very reliable speed, and it's just constantly able to make progress, and it just has good matchups. It has coverage too, some coverage like Brave Bird, right? Um, Super solid mon. It even looks like Calm Mind. It has ways to like kind of cheese around matchups. Um, it has like funky tools to work with. So yeah, I think Tapu Koko like really deserves this spot. Um, it just covers a lot, right? And it's good at what it does, and it doesn't ever fall back and look like it's trash. And that's all it needs to do. And it doesn't have a ton of weaknesses. We'll get into weaknesses. Like, this isn't really a weakness, right? I mean, you could say Coco's not that strong, which is true. It's not that strong. But it doesn't really hold it back from, like, what it wants to do, right? And it's the same thing with Lando, right? Lando is not that fast, but it doesn't really hold Lando back from what it wants to do. Even like the fact that Urshifu Rapid and Keldeo exist, right? Just get some Pokemon that match up okay into them, or maybe just cope about those matchups. Honestly, either way, that's fine. Right? These are kind of fake flaws. I think Torn has the most real flaws. It's just that I think that Torn does a little bit more here than Tapu Koko. I think it's debatable. Even you could say Tapu Koko is better than Torn, right? This is a shorter list, right? But soft checking a huge portion of the metagame, I'm really talking about huge, and then being able to do that consistently over and over and over, like that's a high upside and high ceiling in what it's able to potentially do. Um, Probably higher than what Coco can potentially do, right? Um, but it comes with a couple weaknesses here and there. It's a fine trade off. Um, like, oh, maybe I can check cart and I can check, a bunch of other stuff, but I need to kind of play careful and it's actually reasonable. So number four, this is where I think people gonna really divert, from my opinion. Mew, it's just broken. Like the strengths, I could literally list strengths until like the end of time, right? Because it basically just has an infinite move set. Um, Mew, Mew is it's just capable of doing too much. That it just never has a bad matchup, and it really, Meteor Beam. I mean, there's too many things it can do. I don't even want to like sit here and list them, right? Because it's too much. It's actually, when you look at the list of strengths, Mew's gonna dominate. It's just that Mew has more weaknesses. So let's get into those weaknesses. Foremost, Slut Syndrome. Can't do everything at once. Psychic typing is bad offensively. Psychic typing is bad defensively. It has no stab, as far as I'm concerned. Psychic is just terrible. It's just terrible. It's horrible. It doesn't have a strong move. It has like terrible things that it covers. The defensive typing, it might as well have like one resist. Because it's just like fighting and psychic, and then it has a bunch of weaknesses that kind of suck. It doesn't have high speed. It doesn't have high attack. It doesn't have high special attack. It doesn't want to cover rolls. It can't cover rolls, and it's hard to use. You need to actually think about your Mew every single game. It's like you actually, like it's like annoying to use, like where you actually need to be smart. You can't just plug and play this guy. You actually have to think, right? So, um, that's a weakness. But if you're putting in the effort, right, as long as you can cover the roles elsewhere, it just has such high upside, that it doesn't really matter that it doesn't want to and generally can't cover roles. And you could sometimes flex it into something if you really need it, right? Like, oh, I want Mew to be my Scarfer. Well, maybe you can do that. Um, but that's not the identity of Mew, is being able to flex into roles. It really isn't something that does that. It's more of, I'm going to break, I'm going to sweep, I'm going to do, let's set some hazards up, improve the performance of the rest of the team. Maybe I'm going to be a pivot. Um, the way people have to play around Mew, they almost have to stay in a lot of the time and risk things because of the setup capabilities. And oftentimes that can mean in a lot of matchups, not always, that Mew can just break things down with like a life orb. Like there's just too many ways that Mew can go. They could also be, oh, instead of, I don't want it to set up, I don't want to get hazards up, and then I'm gonna sack something to like a breaker view. Like there's just too many ways it can do things that it's really difficult to respond to. But on the same vein, if it's responded to correctly, sometimes that four move slot syndrome will hold it back. Sometimes it has enough moves to kind of get what it wants to do going, and I just think that it has too many good matchups and not very many bad matchups, and that it's pretty easy to compensate um, for not covering many roles if you're building a more offensive team. Um, so yeah, I think that Mew is probably the fifth best spawn. I think there are other things that don't cover that many roles um, that just do less than Mew, and that's kind of where I stand. So let's go with Kartana next. Good speed tier, great scarfer, powerful breaker. You can even do the speed beast boost, by the way. Guaranteed progress, very strong knockoff. As an underrated defensive profile, low key, you invest that SPDF stat. Maybe you can take stuff from like Prim. You can actually take stuff from a lot of the more prominent special attackers, funny enough. Um, and some of the physical attackers have some trouble breaking some of your fat sets. You have synthesis and stuff. You're a good cleaner. You have a lot of snowball effect because of beast boost. And tailwind. This is the best tailwind user in the game. Um, even defog is very usable in the set, or on a Kartana set. Like Kartana just does a lot. Actually, it actually covers like a decent amount of roles. As funny as that sounded, it actually has like this. It has its own defensive profile, and it's not terrible. Obviously, you know, we'll talk about the weaknesses. Um, but yeah, it has a ton of pros right here. The defensive profile, like desired from a steel type, it doesn't meet that criteria. Oh, he doesn't get rocks. Because steel types and sword and shield just don't get rocks. It doesn't happen. And it's terrible SPDF, so revenge killing. It's not that hard if you can like defensively live hits. It has some ones that are known to get past like Zapdos, but in general, right? Like its defensive profile is not terrible. It's just bad for a steel type. So that kind of leaves you in a weird spot trying to fill out the rest of the team. Um, and it kind of leads me to, in a sense, to question, maybe Cortana doesn't belong here at five. Like this is one that I'm not as confident in. Is it really just good? Maybe not. Um, because trying to fill in that role, I'm not sure how I feel about that yet. Um, I don't think that it's necessarily something I don't think can be worked, right? But I'm not so sure I've seen it done to the fullest potential yet. So, this is a bit of a tentative ranking for Cartana because trying to fill out these roles, like, am I gonna have an ice beam switch in? Um, like obviously, just draft another steel, draft another water, um, maybe even draft an ice type. Like you could say all these things, but it's easier said than done. Because you also you don't just need to draft roles; you need to actually draft a team, right? So it is what it is. Um, I think Cortana is good. There's also some other weaknesses here, like vacuum wave on Mew exist. Mew can get around a lot of its bad matchups. Like that's just reality. But let's talk about the next guy. Weavile, another elite speed Pokemon. Great stabs, awesome to spam, great against the top Pokemon. Knockoff, guaranteed progress, very strong. Swords Dance wins games. You have extremely useful Ice Shard. This guy just hits really hard. Um, you know, strong moves, guaranteed progress moves, ability to clean, really good priority, really good speed. It could be your only speed, and you'll probably get away with it. But plenty of things respond to it in the short term. I can just have a Keldeo respond to it. Yes, it gets Psycho Cut, but short term tough. It's difficult to get on the field, has awful defense. Vulnerable to stuff like Vacuum Wave. There's other problems too. If you want to improve its output, it's weak to rocks. Um, Obviously, that's a big issue. Very prominent issue. I didn't include it. I forgot. I don't know why I forgot. I just kind of brushed by Weavile pretty quick. Um, Weavile's like pretty simple like Pokemon. It just pressures a lot at the top of the meta. There's not a lot of speed that's that good. Um, as good as Weavile. It might be weak to rocks, right? But it just does so much damage. Um, it just Sword Dance is real, and it just wins games. And you see it in practice that it performs. At this point, it is pretty funny. The mons I've listed. Um, and my next pick's gonna. I'm smiling about it. um, I guess I'll show you. I got Landawai. I got Landawai. Glop, you were right. Glop, you're right. This is the elite wall breaker. It does great damage immediately. Strong setup options, just like Lando T, right? You got explosion, great for trading, just like Lando T. Rocks, right? Knockoff, U-turn, you still got all that stuff. The defensive profile is not that bad. Do we need it to check a Coco? Yeah, it can do that. It can do that. And it can do that better than a Garchomp can do. Can check these Pokemon. It can check a Zera, and it can do that while not being completely dysfunctional. It will hurt a little bit, but you should try to get a Garchomp to do it. It's going to be completely dysfunctional, and that's why. That's not the only reason why that it's higher, but yeah. If you're watching this, right, you probably, I don't know if you noticed that Garchomp hasn't appeared yet, and I just put a Lando Eye in front of your face. Um, that is in fact me saying that it is better than Garchomp. Um, so yeah, and then I made a whole video. It's also in the channel, but it's kind of ranty. You probably don't want to watch it. About Garchomp, where I'm going to go into depth of that. Partially why this is true is basically the same speed here as Garchomp. Here, it has the coverage that where it wants to do. It does what it wants to do, right? So this is a great Pokemon. It really does everything you want a ground type to do. Um, it just doesn't go like the step above and beyond where Atlanta T went, right? It might be a little bit better breaker, but it doesn't cover nearly as many roles. But it's not like useless in terms of covering roles. Like, you want this to check a Min Shao? It probably can, right? It's just not able to do that and be good at other things as much as Lando T is. Where Lando T can kind of do everything at once. So weaknesses. It does have some severe ones, right? So sometimes you need to rely on Focus Blast. Not a great move. Not super bulky. Needs to be tailored a little bit to play the defensive roles. Kind of a decent issue, right? So while it wants to do or can do some of these more specialized jobs, it's not the best at it. But it's not terrible, right? It totally is serviceable in these roles, which is something, it's a plus. The biggest weakness is the first one that I wrote, and that is that occasionally, like, you make a click and you're just in a position where, oh, my Lando T needs to now, or my Lando I needs to just switch off the field because I just didn't make progress. And it kind of sucks. And it can be skewed in different scenarios. You could even say, like, to some extent, oh, Corviknight comes in on the Lando T and you click Earthquake. Like, yeah, you probably don't make progress. Maybe it's Helmet and you click U-turn. Honestly, that's probably an okay trade, right? Lando T's health. Lando T is not a sustaining Pokemon. It's about the short term game a lot of the time. Maybe if it's a Scarfer, right? How much do you really need the health, right? Maybe they have a Scarfer that's a little faster. You need a little bit of health. Rocks are up. Maybe you need to Lando at 50. But it depends, right? This guy is a little bit worse with I need to make a play or I just won't get into good positions. So That's a big weakness. And I considered having this Pokemon lower because of this weakness, but what I just see too much upside here. I think having a Pokemon that can set rocks and trade as your ground type in a meta where steels don't set rocks is really valuable. I think that it being a really good breaker and having a lot of like guaranteed progress tools is fantastic. Um, I, and then having a defensive profile on top of that, like this Pokemon can't be bad. It can't, right? Like you could see that it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't get progress, but in some certain scenarios. But even then, like even if you don't click Stone Edge into this Torrentee or Rock Slide in Leno Ice case, right? It was Stone Edge with Leno T. You could still boom and knock it out. Like there's still, and maybe that will cover the thing in front of you as well. Like this thing just has options and it has fallbacks and it has, you know, all right. I think it's great. I think that it really is underrated right now. I think that's dangerous. It's able to set up. It can rock polish. It can comment. It can sword stance. All that setup is super dangerous on it. Get it behind screens. It can just win games. Like honestly, I really believe that. So let's go on. It's time to talk about number 8. You got Garchomp. Here the man is. The man of the hour. That is probably ranked in a position that a lot of people wouldn't have him. Tempo tools, really good, right? Skill shot, sword stance, super dangerous. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's a strength. I wrote it. It's hard to revenge kill. It has gates and coverage. It can hit things hard. It can Corviknight comes in, you get Fire Fang with Swords Dance, right? Pretty good. Pretty good. You get the tools, you get the basic bare bones, you get Stealth Rocks. The special sets are fine, right? Sweet Tear's good. Forces a ton of prep. Probably the most distinct thing about Garchomp is how much prep it actually forces. It forces so much prep. And that is something I have to give it, right? And then it has it's strong into some matchups like Torrentee where you could just scale shot Stone Edge, right? In theory. In theory. Um but when we're talking about forcing prep, and this isn't in my next slide, there's an interesting, thought process behind that it's important to force your opponent's prep. But I don't actually like that philosophy. Um, the way I look at it, okay, you can't really force your opponent to do anything. Um, you can play with 5 Pokemon because your Garchomp is so bad if they prep for it. And just say, oh, okay, then I'm going to have something to capitalize on something my opponent will do to cover Garchomp. Cool. But now you're playing 20 points down. And so what you're probably going to do is not even bring a Garchomp that forces prep. And they might not acknowledge it. So you're in scenarios where there's just a lot of things that can happen. Now, I don't know if I said that forcing prep isn't real, but I don't subscribe to the philosophy, right, that your opponent having to prepare in a certain way is good. Now, here's what I do believe forcing prep is real, but I more so believe it's real on the user themselves. So, before I go to the next slide and show you some of the plethora of weaknesses Garchomp has, that I've written down, I want to talk about you have scenarios sometimes where if your Pokemon covers a lot of roles, like a Landorus Therian, it may open up the door for some of your other Pokemon to be able to prepare in different ways. And so, what I mean is maybe, your Landorus can check a certain Pokemon. In this case, let's say it can check Cinderace. And therefore, since you have a check short term to Cinderace, and you have a Blastoise, you could say, all right, well, my Shell Smash Blastoise can set up on Cinderace, and I have a short term check defensively. So now I feel safe running a Shell Smash Blastoise instead of a defensive pivot Blastoise. And so, sometimes forcing prep goes the other way, where it's about forcing or opening up options for the rest of your team instead of limiting what your opponent can do. And that is more effective because it's constructive and it's controllable, right? Where forcing your opponent's prep, that's a little speculative. And playing down 20 points of material um just sometimes isn't worth the actual benefit you get for that. So just some food for thought, because I don't actually think that Garchomp opens up a ton of roles for other Pokemon on the team. So I actually think from a prep forcing perspective, it not only forces your opponent into certain prep, but it also forces you into certain prep. And that's an often neglected reality, right? Pokemon that cover fewer roles um, force your prep. So it's double edged. But weaknesses. Tank Chomp's terrible. It's garbage. It's absolute trash. I don't want to see it ever again. It's okay, that's a lie, right? Sometimes you need it. But guess what? If you're running Tank Chomp every week, don't draft Garchomp. Don't draft it. It's not good. It's not good. Draft Lando, like if you can get your hands on Lando T and you're drafting Garchomp before Lando T and then you're running Tank Chomp, you're just dumb. I'm not gonna lie, you're just dumb. Because Garchomp has a strictly worse defensive profile. And it's a strictly worse rocker. It's just not as good because it can't trade after that as well. It's just, just watch the games. Just watch the games. DCO games. Every DCO game, almost every DCO game, it was like 4 games. It was either a toxic bot or a rocker. And just, that's all it did all game. Lando T, if it's going to be a rocker, it's probably going to do more than that. At least it's going to Intim cycle once. At worst. At worst. Maybe you can run Cast App, explode later in the game, knock something out. Chomp, no. Chomp is terrible. There was like one game with 100 from DPO where he got like a bunch of helmet chips and stuff. Cool for him. Like, right? Like, sometimes it's going to work. But it's just really bad value for 20 points. Okay. The rolls. The rolls, absolutely terrible. This Pokemon does not cover rolls. It doesn't. It covers no rolls at all. The typing is abysmal. It's one of the worst things ever. It's so bad. I'm you resist fire. Cool. You need to invest just to live Bicephalon for the record, because Fire Blast will two-shot you from specs. Bikini blows you up. Okay, like you can pretend you switch in, you really don't. Like kinda, right? You can kind of eat some, but like, do you really want to be doing that? Like, you probably can, right? In a pinch, it isn't that big of a deal. And you still have to make a play because if it glaciates, you're in trouble. Cinderace, okay, yeah, you can kind of deal with Cinderace. It's kind of whatever, though, to me. Does that really matter that much? Is Cinderace that much of a threat? Are we that worried about a Cinderace now? It's not that fast. it doesn't really cover the speed roll. Um, and you have to pick like it's very hard to pick other luxury ones. Um, and again, the steel types in this meta don't get stealth rocks. So if you want to run this as a stealth rocker, you're wasting its value. You're just wasting it. And if you want to get some other rocker, oh, you're going to get Necrozma. You're wasting its value. And it's also a luxury mod, so you'll fill no rolls either. So go get Uxie, go get Mesprit, go get Celebi. Yeah, probably not that. Because those are your options for rocks, really. Um, it can sabotage the team into top threats. Zera, Tapu Koko. You know, they're harder with Garchomp as your ground type. 100 drafted a Palo Sand, and he brought him into those matchups, or his team at least did, right? So I think you may have been well aware of this. Coco and Zera are harder to deal with because, and then it's being forced into a reactive role, and Garchomp is just not good in those scenarios. It's not good at being reactive. It wants to be offensive in a meta where it can't really do that a lot. Orlando T can flex into both jobs at the same time. Orlando I can kind of pick and choose, right? Garchomp is told it wants to be one thing when it can't be that thing, basically. And it's really hard to position. And like actually getting it into like winning positions is nasty. Where Scale Shot can actually pick things off and then you can get free SDs, or vice versa is very difficult. Oftentimes something will set screens in front of you and you just get into tricky situations. And we're not. Scale Shot also sucks. It's terrible. It's 90% accurate. It lowers your defense and it has like a pretty high likelihood at being a 50 base power move. It's because it's a multi-hit move. This is garbage. This is a terrible move to be clicking. Like, and if you watch games, just watch games. For the past year, Garchomp has not had a standout performance. The best performance that I watched, and I watched a ton of Garchomp games before I made this ranking because I, wanted to just remind myself, hey, I know that Garchomp had a great DPL performance, but I don't remember having standout runs. So I wanted to watch some of these. One of the best performances I saw watching all of DCL, almost all that DUI teams run, was 100 versus Ethan. And, that was one of the best Garchomp performances I watched. And you can go watch that game. DPL Season 9. I believe it was week 1. And I'll tell you, it's not like Garchomp swept that game. It just had like a solid performance where like other ground types couldn't have done the same thing. Like there's another game where it did a lot, okay? And that was against Olivia. And in that Olivia game, where 100 played Olivia, yes, Garchomp did a lot, but it was in a position where every single ground type in the entire game would have basically had a winning position. A Nidoking would have had a very winning position where 100 was in the game against Olivia. So, I'm not just looking at, did Garchomp do anything? I'm kind of looking at, did Garchomp do anything relative to its competition? And when you look at it that way, I think the Ethan game is more impressive because, like, I think you could make the argument that it probably did a little bit of what it did because of it actually being a Garchomp. But that being said, like Rough Skin's not a terrible ability; it's another strength. I just don't see these tempo tools and these setup sets, actually functioning a lot in practice. And you know, while it really is limiting in the builder, I think it's also limiting to the user. Um, and I think that you get denied rocks a lot. Because like, we're talking about like rocks, right? If you don't want to be limited to a tank chomp and you want to get a Mesprit or an Uxie, are you going to run a rocks, Uxie, and Mesprit every week if you don't want to get rocks up? I mean, again, you could run rocks on chomp, or you could just not run rocks, right? But you're kind of limiting things. Garchomp can always fit. I mean, Land of T can always fit rocks. Do whatever it wants to do. Always functional. It may not ever click them, but if you really need them, the option's there. With Garchomp, they kind of have to commit a little bit. So, you know, it's a little different. And it just doesn't cover rolls. And if you want to talk about a different Pokemon that didn't cover rolls, if we go back a little bit, we had Mew. And if you look at how many upsides they wrote for Mew, how many benefits, we're not looking at a fair comparison here when we're looking at Mew and Garchomp. Mew does so much more than Garchomp. And quite honestly, if you want to look at the flaws Mew has, 4 moveslot syndrome, I mean, that's really just, if Mew had all its moves, it'd be the most broken thing in the world. It's still going to be good with 4 moves. Those stats, well, when you're ripping off the best coverages available, it's not always that big of a deal. Garchomp speed is not a roll fill. So other than it being difficult to use, when we're looking at actual good players, how are you going to tell me that Garchomp is better than Mew? It's just not. It just doesn't have the strengths. And it has very similar weaknesses. And more. It's just more weaknesses. In fact, Garchomp performs worse defensively than Mew because Mew can at least try to soft check certain things just based on its bulk. 100, 100, 100 bulk is decent. Um, even though I say 100, 100, 100 offenses aren't, 100, 100, 100 bulk is. That is good. That is good bulk. So, yeah, that's kind of where I stand on Garchomp. Watching its performances, not good. I do think it's better than where its performances are. It has enough strength here to be functional, right? I just think that it doesn't provide rolls, and if you're not going to provide rolls, you're not going to beat some of these other Pokemon. Lando Eye does perform rolls, and it also is just a faster breaker. It trades better. If you're gonna run, I've seen a lot of rock sleed Mews in these games. I just think Lando Eye is a much better rock sleed. You just get boom. Um, you break harder. You might not be as forcing, and you might not force as much prep. You just do more. So yeah, let's go to number 9. We got Zera. Elite speed again, like Weavile. Another guaranteed progress, like Weavile. Doesn't have spam stabs that are just ridiculous. It's just electric stab. Occasionally has a niche defensive profile. It's generally not that good. Dangerous pivot. You can remove the grounds and then just start kind of taking control of the game a little bit. It can be a good explosive sweeper. You can't really shut it down. You can kind of taunt toxis breaking unaware and stuff. It's kind of irrelevant, but it can come up something like that. Those are just decent moves to have. Toxic is not really anything special. Almost everything gets it. Yeah, some setup, right? Decent coverage. Certain times it can kind of break through stuff, and kind of breaks for itself. So decent on here, but multiple roadblock checks kind of really stop it from being dominant throughout the whole game. You kind of have to wait a while before Zeraora kind of goes nuts a lot of the time. So it's more of an end game type of mon, and you have to kind of take a bunch of setbacks in a way. It wants to come in a lot, so sometimes it's gonna get worn down over time. Um, it doesn't really offer that much defensively. I'm kind of stretching it with the other thing. But it offers, the speed, and it doesn't have a lot of support tools, especially for an electric type. A lot of them get screens and stuff. It doesn't have hazards, it doesn't have screens. It doesn't have any support tools. Um, but it's really solid because it kind of breaks for itself. And if you kind of sustain the game or keep playing the game, like you can eventually win a lot of the time, right? Especially if you're very highly skilled. But it's a bit more difficult and tricky just to win with than some of the others. And then we got number 10. Now Celesteela, very good mon. Meteor beam, smoke stuff, auto sweeps, snowballs, very good snowballs. Can trade very well. Steel beams generally not a good trade tool, but still the positioning to be able to get off the field is important. Good steel stabs, very strong, heavy slam, 120 base power almost all the time. Defensive profile is great. For steel, not the bulkiest, but it's a good defensive option. It could sustain itself, get chip. Um, it's just generally a pretty good defensive mon. Beast boost, yeah, snowball out of control. Weakness policy, is always a threat. You can kind of position it sometimes if you're not like bulky sets. Where you can kind of make some bluffs. Maybe your meteor beam and you show to be weakness policy, and then you can buy yourself an extra turn. So and it's got great coverage. So a lot you can do with Steela. I think it's a very good mod. Just a lot of offensive capabilities, a lot of win con capabilities, and has some defensive merit, like a decent amount of it. As for most of Ninja Metal Zoo, though, the special tech and the attack aren't that high. It relies on like the boosts and stuff to really get going. The roll bulk is just okay. Can't really like you could say, oh, I want Steel to check some guy. Like that kind of works. It's not the greatest at doing that. Is basically what I'm saying. Um, especially if it's like a sweeper, like because it just doesn't have like the stats to necessarily like it can kind of trade. It's just it's really not that good at this. The stat swings from EVs is huge, so you have to pick and choose your strengths because an invested Steela is quite bulky, an uninvested Steela is quite frail. An attack or special attack invested Steela versus an uninvested one is again very different. You don't have stealth rocks, you don't have ice resist. Again, steel types are just tricky this gen. Like none of them. You have scissor, you have Steela, you have Aegislash, you have Melmetal, you have Kartana. And those are some of the 5 of the best steel types, and none of them did rocks. None of them. Most of steel sets hate taking knockoff. I hear people say sometimes, steel is a knock resist. No, the hell it ain't. No, it ain't. If you're a lefty set, you don't want to get knocked. If you're a medium beam set, you don't want to get knocked. If you're a weakness policy set, you don't want to get. Almost all the sets, you don't want to get knocked. This thing never wants to get knocked. Almost. I mean, you can do it, but I don't think I would. And then the defensive stats can be like starved for progress versus certain defensive cores because of like regen and stuff. But that's not super relevant. Usually it just takes a little bit longer to make progress, and still can still kind of do it. But maybe you have like a helmet or two. It just can get kind of awkward. But yeah, that's my list. Maybe I have some unpopular takes here. But this is really what I think. And if you were to ask me, would I draft in this way? Right? Probably, honestly. I certainly would take Lando T first overall. I certainly would take Torrent T second overall. I certainly would take Coco third. I would take me fourth. Cart fifth, and Weave sixth, and Lando seventh, and Trump eight. Maybe I could see myself swinging like between these ones. When do I, and Garchomp. They're really close. In some ways, I just I don't see it. I don't see Garchomp quite getting over that hump. Especially in this modern era. Um, and I could say I could sit here and say it's about the meta. Um, and to some extent, yes, right. Um, like some of the fat is gone, and some new stuff like again Keldeo being here. Chomp's not that great into Keldeo. But nor is like Lando, right? Um, but like Slurking Galar not being there might have been an easier setup target for Chomp. Give it an extra turn. You could argue that, right? Because you want to sustain your Slurking. And now that a lot of the pieces I think are more expendable, like when you're playing these more offensive playstyles. So Garchomp doesn't get these free setup turns. I guess it is something that has changed, right? Because if we go back to the weaknesses, like I think these a lot of these are they've kind of always been true, right? Something I kind of neglected when I talked about Jump is, why are these now showing up? Why are we talking about this now? Um, and that could always be a question, right? Um, Part of it also is players getting better. Um, them learning how to actually position well and how to prep a little bit better because we are improving, right? And while the meta changes might not completely shift in such a way that like Garchomp becomes a lot worse, part of it also is that as people get better, among that is linear, um, which I think Garchomp is rather linear. It gets worse because it may not consistently be able to get that positioning. And if people are trying to really win, maybe doing a lot of reps, they're really not going to feel that this Garchomp is effective if they're not consistently able to get this and the positioning isn't working. Um, I also feel that even back then, these problems did still exist, in a large part for Chomp, and we just sucked too much to take advantage of them. That is my honest opinion. Um, it's not completely a meta change thing more than it is a player change thing. And I do think there are pieces of the meta and components. The fact that it got more offensive, I think that also hurt Garchomp. Um, because of expendability. And as soon as things become expendable, Garchomp might get one kill a game, and that kill won't matter because the game will just move on, and Garchomp won't be able to catch up. Uh, but yeah, and really everything else like should be kind of clear why the meta is going in that direction. But if or in kind of why I feel like I've explained it right because these are some of the weirder ones. Weavile has been coming up for a while. Cart. I mean, we've seen carts rise already, right? So a lot of this is just I'm kind of harping a little bit on Garchomp, but that's because it's one of my takes that is a little bit more of a projection, right? Or a modern opinion, or a diversion from the standard that is set. So I'm sorry if I'm harping on that specific one a little bit. Um, but that is, I think, one that I really want to emphasize because I'm gonna be honest. I think the difference between Garchomp and Mew um, is substantial. I really do. Because we can say, hey, Garchomp or a Mew doesn't fill any roles. So you basically have to draft a team and then just have a Mew on there. Garchomp's the exact same way. If you tell me this thing does rolls, you're just lying to me. Mew's defensive typing arguably is better than Garchomp's defensive typing. You poison, rock, and fire? Are you kidding me? Versus psychic and fighting. I think psychic and fighting might be better resists. So, yeah, that's what I've got. I hope you'd enjoyed and you hope you learned something.